Hey everybody, this is Turner Hagen coming back at you with another episode of Tech Tips with Jaycox Implement. In last week's episode we showed how to create guidance lines using AccuTurn SMS, but today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, still with the guidance theme, but this time we're going to be talking about Case IH AccuTurn. AccuTurn is the system or program that allows Case IH tractors to be able to turn on the end rows automatically, no hands on the steering wheel needed. So in today's video we're going to go how to set that up and show you what you need to do so we can get you set up to run it this fall. So some of you may have heard of AccuTurn before, but maybe want to know a little bit more about what it is. So it was released in 2016 by Case IH, and what it allows the operator, or basically allows the tractor, to be able to turn on the end rows automatically for clean, consistent end rows, and also make sure that the implement is squared up every single time. It also allows a person to, let's say, skip some swaths so that every other pass is maybe where they're going to be working. Say we got a short tillage implement like a ripper or something like that. Well, we can easily skip swaths so that way we don't have as tight of a turn on our headland to get to the next pass. So what implements or what tractors are compatible with this system? So the Steigers, Magnums, and Pumas all can run AccuTurn, as well as the Patriot and Trident sprayers. So what's required? The main thing that's required is we get both the Nav and the Pro 700 software up to version 30.16 or above. Then after that, all we need is an activation code to unlock the feature. So the activation code, that costs $1,200, but we do have a 10-day demo period that I would love to give out so that some people can try that in the fields this fall. So now that you kind of know a little bit more, let's go in and actually set it up and use it on this tractor. All right, now that we're in the cab of the tractor, first thing we need to do to make sure before we get our activation code is see what software versions we're on. So to do that, what I need to do is go to the back button here and go to Diagnostics and Version. So in here I can actually see the framework, large tractor, and precision farming software that is included in that. So like I said, we need version 30.16 and above. But obviously the later the software version, the better, just because there's been subtle improvements that they made to the system as time's gone on. So that's how we can check that out. Then the other thing, if I want to check my nav controller software, I go over to the CAN button. I'll scroll down to where I can see nav 2/3. So in here, version 9.97 is what I'm on. Some of you may see like 9.26. That would probably be the minimum version I would run. Otherwise, we would want to get that updated first before we actually use the AccuTurn system. So now that I've checked my software versions and determined that I'm good to go, to enter the code, either demo or permanent activation, what I need to do is go to Toolbox, and I need to scroll all the way over to the end where it says Activate. So if you don't have a code currently entered for it, what your precision farming specialist is going to need is the serial number that's displayed right here. So in this case, 4016010385. So once I have that code, I can give that to my precision farming specialist and he can generate the activation code for me. So if they aren't out there to set this up, if you want to try to get the demo code unlocked, what you need to do is you need to go to Activate, and it'll give you this warning that there wasn't a file found. So you go to Manual, and then you can actually punch the code in right there. So once you get your code punched in, you just would hit Enter down here, and then it would pop up and say that AccuTurn is unlocked for 10 days if you got a demo code, or unlimited if you have the permanent activation in there. Then the display is also going to go through a reboot and start back up, and then you'll see that the AccuTurn function right here is enabled. So once we get that code activated, next step would be to go to AccuTurn here and actually go and turn this to on. So with that on, there are a couple different menu items here, and something that's really going to help you out if you are setting this up is you want to go, they've provided help menus to actually explain what each item is. So let's say we go to our minimum radius. So here it tells me what that box is for and what adjustments, if I make it to the values there, what that's actually going to do as far as the AccuTurn performance goes. So with AccuTurn, there's going to be 3 different triggers that I can utilize to start my turn. One's going to be on a headland, one's going to be on the outer boundary, and one's going to be on the end of swath. So with headland, what's going to happen is that if I have a headland boundary created, when I hit that headland, it will start automatically and create the turn that way. If I have my outer boundary selected as my trigger, what's going to happen is the tractor is going to go all the way to the outer boundary before it will make its turn. So what I'm going to recommend is, if you do have boundaries, use the headland trigger, so that way we can get a consistent turn as well as maintain or make sure that we're staying inside the field. The final one is end of swath. So where this one's going to be useful is if I have don't have boundaries created in my fields. What I can do is, based on the start and stop point of, let's say, an AB line, that will actually be my trigger. And we'll go into further depth on how to use this end of swath mode a little bit later in this video. So that's my 3 triggers that will actually start the turn for me. So my swaths to skip, what this allows me to do is, like it kind of implies, is I can either make one pass, turn around and go right next to that same pass, or I can skip a swath, so that way my turn on my headland isn't so tight. So where this is useful is especially with smaller implements, let's say a disc ripper or something like that. You know, with that, or an articulated tractor, something that's going to be really long, instead of having to make that turn completely 180 and come right up to the next pass, I can skip a swath, 2, 3, 4. I can skip as many as I want. I can even skip 5 if I want to, and move that over, so that way it'll turn out, follow the end of the row, and turn back in on the 5th swath. Turn early or turn late, what this is going to do is, based on my trigger, is what it's going to apply. So if I go to my number back here, a negative number is going to be a earlier turn. So if my headland boundary, let's say, is right here, well, the turn's actually going to start 17 feet before that. Or let's say my headland boundary is here and I want to go here, a positive number, my headland boundary or my AccuTurn is going to start the turn 22 feet after I cross the boundary line. So this really allows you to fine-tune each turn and make sure that it matches both the amount of headland space you have and your implement width. By default, we start at 0, and that's what I would say would be a good starting point would be. So the next box we need to talk about is minimum radius. So this is an important item to actually set, because if you have the minimum radius too tight, what's going to happen is your tractor won't be able to follow the path, and eventually your guidance will kick out. If you have it too wide, well, then you're just going to be using excess space. So the tractor and implement may be able to make a tighter turn, but if you have this minimum radius set too high, then it won't utilize all of its space efficiently. So it's really good to fine tune this number as you're going along to make sure for your tractor and implement that it's set up correctly. Because again, if we have too tight of a radius, well, one, the tractor might not be able to physically make the turn, but number 2, is I might actually collide with the drawbar on my implement, and we know we don't want to do that. So again, make sure your minimum turn radius is accurate or fits best for your tractor implement setup. Implement compensation, what this is this is going to adjust my vehicle path to compensate for my implement and how it turns. So let's say that the way my implement follows my vehicle, that to get it squared up on the other end, I may have to add, let's say 7 foot of turn. And so what that means is that my vehicle is going to turn out 7 feet on the first half of the turn and then turn back in, and that should be enough to square up my implement. Or let's say I got a really long implement, I might need that too, again, to make sure I can make my turn successful and that it's squared up when I enter or go back into the main part of the field. If I go to a negative number, my first part of my implement or my turn is going to be wider, but the second half is going to be tighter. So it's going to move that whole curve this way, so again, to help with the squaring up. So it might be something that you just have to play with as you're going along, again, depending on your implement and how you have it set up. By default, we have 0 on there, and that's what I would start with. So working distance, you can see it's got a yellow background, so I can't actually even adjust this. Where it's pulling this value from is from my implement tab. So if you scroll over and go to implement, it's pulling this from the bar distance. So bar distance is going to be from the center of the rear axle to where my ground engagement point is. So in this case, I got an 875 disc ripper. I got 100 inches from the axle of the tractor to where the discs are on the ripper. So this measurement is actually quite critical for how AccuTurn builds the curve and for optimal performance. So make sure you get that measurement correct. Then the rest of this is all the same as you would set up any other implement. We got our physical width and our swath width, and this can be adjusted depending on what accuracies you have, and obviously the width of each implement. The other thing you want to make sure is you have the correct type, either a towed or a hitched. Because if you have let's say a towed implement and you have it set for a 3-point hitch, well, that's going to affect how the AccuTurn system draws the curve. So make sure that for sure the implement type and the bar distance are correct for the implement you are towing. We'll head back into the AccuTurn menu here. So the next box we have is AutoSpeed. So what AutoSpeed is basically AccuTurn will build the curve based on the current vehicle speed. So let's say I got again my disc ripper here, pulling that at 4.5, 5 miles an hour. Well, really I can leave that on AutoSpeed on because really when I'm on the headland and on the end rows, I'm not going to slow down a ton. Where we might need to turn this off and manually set our speed is, say I got a high speed disc like the 475 speed tiller, where through the field I'm pulling that at 10, 11 miles an hour, but when I turn, obviously I can't turn that fast. So what it will do is, based on this speed, so let's say I'm going to turn at 4.5 miles an hour, it will build the turn based on that speed that I inputted. So I just need to make sure as an operator that I slow the tractor down to match or go below that speed, so that way the turn is set up correctly. So again, depending on your use, you might need to have that on or off. I'm going to leave this on for my purposes today. And then finally we have implement reference. So there's 2 options that I have, is center point and multi-point. With center point, it's going to reference the center point of the implement, and that's when it's going to start its turn. Where this comes into a factor is when I'm going into, let's say, a diagonal end row and when to trigger my turn. So if I have center point selected, it's going to start the curve when that center implement or center of the implement crosses the threshold. So what that means is there's going to be part of the implement that's in already worked ground, and then there's going to be a small section of unworked ground that I'll be leaving with this set up. So if I want to make sure that I get the full pass of the implement through my boundary before it starts to turn, I need to have multi-points selected. So that way it's going to reference both the center, the left end, and the right end when deciding when to start the turn based on, again, if I'm coming at an angle this way or this way into my headland, so that it turns correctly and I don't leave any areas unworked. So those are the basic setups. Now we're actually going to go out and utilize these settings and enable AccuTurn on this tractor. So before we actually use AccuTurn out in the field, there are a few changes we need to make to our layout. So to make those changes, we need to go over here. Again, we're in Toolbox and Layout. And what I want to do is add a few things to my left-hand screen over here. So to do that, I go here where it says Run Screen, select Left Area. And what I want to do is I want to add the AccuTurn 1x2 box. So again, this is going to be where I tell AccuTurn 1 which direction I need to turn, left or right, as well as where I can quickly adjust any settings on the fly while I'm fine-tuning it. This is also going to be where I'm going to have my turn now or my auto enable or disable. So we'll show those features here in just a second. The other thing I'm going to add to my left-hand area, I'm going to add the headland, so I can create a headland from a boundary file. And then I want to add swath manage, and the other one I was going to add is the swath finder. So now that's pretty much all of the things I had to do as far as the layout area goes. So now I can go into my run screen here, and again, make sure my grower farm field is correct. Go to run 4 in here, and I can see, zoom in here, so you can see the boundary file that I have for this field. So what I'm going to do now is go and create my headland boundary. So to do that, I go to the headland tab right here. I'm going to go to manage, and I'm going to click new. So unless you have one that's already been generated, new will be your only option. So I'm going to hit new, and here's where I tell what boundary I want to select off of. So since I have the one exterior boundary, I'll just have that one that's highlighted in blue and hit select. And to set it up, what I can do here is set up the number of sides for the headland. So in my boundary creation video, you saw the where we actually created a headland boundary there. But here, what I can do is create a headland boundary on just two sides, a single side, or all. So here it would look like it'd be if I have it on all. So that would create a boundary across the entire field. And it's probably what I'm going to recommend as far as general use. But for this field, I'm going to actually use the double. So if I want to make sure I'm set up correctly, if I manipulate this, I can move my A point here over. I'll move my B point over here. Move my A1 back a little ways. B1 back a little ways. So that way, again, I have adequate room and it's an accurate gauge for the headland that I'm going to be running. So I'm going to be running north and south here. So that's why I know what sides to do. If I want to swap and edit this side, I just hit the select button, and I can do the same thing and edit those points, my start and stop points, like that. So generally it will find it all right, but there's sometimes where you need to tweak it a little bit more so that it's a little more accurate for you. So you might have to play around with this, but the biggest thing with AccuTurn is, and we're using a headland trigger, is getting our width set up correctly. So what I've found with the headland width, it does 1, 2, and 3 headland passes by default. But with this ripper, with it being only a 16-foot ripper, I actually are going to have to do a little more than that. So in my situation, I'm going to do my width as 80 feet. So that'll give me plenty of room to make my turn and give me the best performance on my AccuTurn that way. Again, this is if I'm doing no swath skipping. This would be, so again, one pass, turn around, come back, and right next to the first pass here. So when I'm happy with my setup here, I just got to hit accept, and then I got to go to headland and turn it to on. And now you can see it populated my headland boundary right there. So then I'll go on to run 3 and start up auto guidance here. And I got my swath already selected, so you can either create a swath if you haven't got one recorded already, or you can pick one from your list. But now we're pretty well ready to go. So I'm going to go back to settings. Now I'm going to set my trigger here to headland. 25 foot minimum radius is a pretty good start. I think that's what it is by default. But you may have to again tweak it depending on your implement width once you go into that first pass here. So I'm going to hit back, and I'm going to start driving forward here. So get engaged on auto guidance, and then I'm going to turn auto on. So this is just giving you a warning that it may end up traveling outside the boundary, but if you have everything set up correctly, it will make the turn within the boundaries there. So as I'm driving ahead, what's going to happen is 10 seconds before I hit the boundary, it's going to tell me to accept. And you can see the pick line here. Here's the actual curve that it drew and the curve that it's going to drive the tractor. We're rounding the corner here. And these are on default settings for both my radius and my implement compensation. So you want to make sure while you're going through the turn that the first time that everything's set up correctly, so again we don't have any collisions or anything like that. So here you can see the tractor's coming around and I'm squaring up for my next pass, and now I can drop the implement down and go ahead. And you can see my turn is already set up for my next turn, which would be, if I was in a normal field situation, to the right. And again, I'm going to go left here. Show that to you one more time. So, got to slow down my speed a little bit. And now tractor's turning itself. So let's say I want to tweak a few settings here. So stop the tractor once. So if I think that by observing the tractor that it's getting a little too close for comfort, that I want to increase this minimum turn radius, I can go in here and bump that figure up. But actually right now it's turning really good for my implement, so I'm going to leave this set to 25. Then the other thing we want to look at is my implement compensation. So depending on how well it's squaring it up, maybe it needs to do a little bit more to square it up. So what I'm going to actually do is put in a negative, start with a -8 here on my implement compensation, because I want my second half of my turn to be tighter than the first half. And again, you can make all these adjustments on the fly if you want to. Now I'm going to be taking off. So go to settings again. Here I can adjust these points if I need to. And okay. Just accept it. Otherwise, if I don't accept it, it won't actually make the turn and it'll just stay engaged on a straight line. So now I'm making my turn again. And it's kind of subtle to tell, but it did move that whole curve over. So again, the last half is tighter than the first half. So that way, when I drop back into my headland here, my implement's squared back up. So yeah, that was using the headland trigger. Again, that's going to be what I recommend for the most accurate use of AccuTurn, so that it contours the farm, I guess, to the same exterior boundary every single time. Let's say we don't have a field boundary set up, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and act like I don't have a headland boundary. So what does AccuTurn do for me then? Well, what I can do is change my trigger to end a swath. So at that point, what it's going to do is based on either two things. One, when I hit my B point on my swath creation, or two, when I hit the turn now function, it's going to say, okay, at this point, I'm going to draw a straight line, and that's where I'm going to turn every single time. So if you have square fields, it will actually work out pretty good for you that way too. So that's what we're going to do this time. I'm going to go ahead. I'm engaged on my line here. And now what I'm going to do is just hit turn now. And I want to turn to the left and not skip any swaths. So it drew the line. And now it's starting the turn for me. So each time I come back to this area of the field, if I then set it on auto, it will start the turn based on where I hit that turn now feature. So I'm going to leave it off again until we get to the other end of the field here. So once I get to the end of the field where I'm pretty happy about starting my headland passes, I'll just hit turn now again, and it draws my curve. So now if I enable auto again, now it's going to start my turn automatically like it was for the headland trigger, but again it's going to be based on where I hit that turn now button. So it just drew a straight line of where I hit that button, and it's going to activate that turn at each point around this point through the field. Now I'm set up for the next pass. So let's say I want to now set up the swath skipping feature. So again, what that allows me to do is if I have a narrower headland space, what I can do is skip every other pass, so that way I can make a wider turn and don't have to worry about using up so much space to get into the next pass. So again, disc rippers is what comes to mind where this comes in really handy. So to do that, I'll go to settings. I'm going to set my swaths to skip to 1. So now I'll gauge on my turn here. Now you can see my curve has gone up quite a bit higher. Now it's able to make a wider turn and not use up as much headland space to make the turn. So that was the basic operation and setup of AccuTurn. If you have any other questions or want to know more, please make sure you reach out to your local precision farming specialist. And I also want to say, if you have any interest either this fall on maybe your four-wheel drive and a ripper, or else in the next spring on your planting tractor, I would love to get this out and demo this to more people so they can actually try it and see what they think of it themselves. So make sure to hit one of your precision farming specialists up if you want to do that. So as always, if you like the video, please give us a thumbs up. Leave us a comment down below for any feedback or any future topics. And make sure you hit subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.